All right. So, for those of you who don't know, we have very slowly been doing a study through the Gospels, but not any one Gospel, putting all the four Gospels together and looking at the life of Jesus. And so far, we've covered that much: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Does anybody remember what we looked at last week? What happened? There's three stories that are going to go together. Not last week, 2 weeks ago. And then this one and the next one. What happened last week? It kind of sets the scene. You said, wasn't it? Or were you going to say, wasn't it not last week? Yeah. Okay, yeah, it was 2 weeks ago. Does anybody remember?
I know what it is.
Okay, go. That's fine.
It's the grain.
Yeah. So what happened?
Jesus and the disciples were walking through a field and they picked some grain because they were hungry. And the Pharisees came through and said that they're breaking the law of the Sabbath.
Correct. So Jesus and the disciples, one Sabbath day, they're just going for a walk in the afternoon. They're walking through some fields. The disciples are apparently hungry. Doesn't say Jesus was hungry, but the disciples were hungry. So they picked some grain and they rubbed it, some like wheat or something, and then ate the kernels. So hungry. The Pharisees saw them doing this and they're like, that's against the law. Why is it against the law?
Because they harvesting on the Sabbath.
Yeah, it's not against the law. It's not stealing. Like, specifically, the law says you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to walk through somebody's field and eat some grain if you want to, or some grapes or whatever else. But you're not allowed to harvest it. Yeah, you're not allowed to use it to sell, like that kind of stuff. But what they were not allowed to do was harvest grain. And so then this came to a thing we're going to talk about in a little bit. But they had this thing called. We'll talk about it in a little bit. They weren't supposed to do that. According to the Pharisees, they weren't supposed to do that. And so they come to Jesus and they say, your disciples are breaking the law. They're harvesting grain on the Sabbath to eat. What did Jesus do? What did he say? So Jesus and his disciples, they go and pick this grain, they eat it. The Pharisees are apparently watching them while they're out in some field somewhere. And they say to Jesus, you and your disciples are breaking the Sabbath law. And Jesus says, you're right. Yeah, he's like, have you not read? These are the people who know pretty much the whole Old Testament off by heart. But Jesus is like, haven't you read? Of course they've read, but they obviously haven't understood. And so he gives them some examples, but what is the final thing he says? I said the final boss argument that he used against them. I am Lord of the Sabbath. What is a Lord? More than that. It's an owner. A Lord is the specific Greek word, because there's different words that mean similar things. The word that's used there for I am the Lord of the Sabbath, it is I own it. Who can say I own the Sabbath law? It's mine. The person who gave it, God, yeah. So that's an incredible thing for him to say. And probably the Pharisees thought you're ridiculous. At this point, all he's done is make a claim. I am God. I own the Sabbath law. Do you think they believed him? Had he done anything in that moment to prove that that was true? No, he's just made a statement. I am the Lord of the Sabbath. The next thing that happens, he starts to prove it. And that's the story we're going to be looking at today. So, I need you to get your Bibles and open to, the story we're going to be reading is recorded in 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In Matthew and Mark, it comes immediately after the story about Jesus in the grain fields, and Luke, actually, in all 3 of them. This morning we're mostly going to be reading from Matthew 12. So you can open there, and then we're going to look at, a couple of times, we're going to look at what Luke says or Mark says that adds some extra information. Okay, so Matthew chapter 9. You all there?
Yep. 9. I thought it was 12.
Sorry, Matthew chapter 12, verse 9. Where should I start? What?
Did you get 6-0?
Oh. I'm not a defender, so. Yeah, but this is not against the bottom team. Do you want to?
Okay.
Read verse 9. Okay, everybody listening, reading along in your Bibles? Chapter 12, verse 9.
Then Jesus went over to the synagogue.
Cool. So where were they before?
Not in the synagogue.
Sorry, in the fields. Matthew says, then Jesus went to the synagogue. From Matthew, we assume he just went straight from the fields to the synagogue. But thanks to, this is where it's cool having different Gospels, Luke actually tells us it was on a different Sabbath. So it wasn't the same week. Maybe next week, maybe a few weeks later, don't know. But after that, he went to the synagogue. And Luke also tells us what he was doing there. He was teaching. So he was allowed to teach in the synagogue. So after he had this confrontation with the Pharisees, he basically went into their synagogue and was able to teach, which is kind of cool. And then what happened? Verse 10. Start reading verse 10.
Where he noticed a man with a deformed hand. The Pharisees asked Jesus,
Hold up, wait. Okay, so, kids are noisy. So what did he find there? Who was in the synagogue?
A man with a deformed hand.
A man with a deformed hand. The Greek word is this, xeros. And it literally means to be dried up. Hello. Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Welcome. You have a Bible? Get your Bible. Grab one of those ones. And we're in Matthew chapter 12. So Jesus is in the synagogue, and there's a man there with a dried up hand. What do you reckon that means? Yeah. It's like all withered up, all the muscle is wasted away, the skin's just kind of looks like it's stuck to the bone. Because somebody who has a paralyzed arm, that's kind of what happens. If they don't use the muscle, all the muscle basically shrivels up, and then you just got the skinny little arm that you can't do anything with. And that's it. Luke also tells us that it was his right hand, just out of interest. So there's a man there with an obviously deformed right hand that he can't use. Okay, finish verse 10.
The Pharisees asked Jesus, does the law permit a person to work by healing on the Sabbath?
Does yours say the Pharisees asked him? Yeah. I wonder if mine just left that out. Because mine says they.
Hey, you're the one that. Hey, you bought it.
No. The Bible translations make it so that it's a bit easier to read. I don't think Matthew actually tells us who it was. I think he just says they said. And so then the question is who is they? But that's again where it's really nice having different translations. Can we quickly turn to Luke chapter 6? Or not different translations, sorry, different Gospels. Because as you're going to see, they all fit together and fill out questions that you get from one as answered in another. So Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. Yeah, you also. Luke 6.
Why do you intentionally lead to your left while doing this?
Luke is the book, 2 books after Matthew.
1.
Verse 7. Chapter 6, verse 7. What does it say? Yes.
The teachers of religious law and the Pharisees watched Jesus closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath.
Right. So who was speaking? Who was there? Teachers of the law, the scribes, and the Pharisees. And they're all watching Jesus closely. They've seen there's a guy here who has a withered hand. And they know if Jesus heals him, they can accuse him of working. Now, we don't know if this was basically a setup, if they put that man there on purpose, or if it was just a coincidence, he happened to be there and they saw this as a good opportunity. But the Pharisees saw there was this guy who had a withered hand, he was suffering, and they knew 2 things. 1, Jesus could heal him, and 2, that Jesus would want to heal him. And rather than be amazed at this man who has the ability to heal and has so much compassion that he wants to, they're like, this is an opportunity, we can get him. Which is ridiculous, but sometimes we are ridiculous. Now, a question that's worth asking is, why would it be against the law to heal somebody on the Sabbath? Why is that working? Well, this comes back to something that we talked about last week. The Jewish rabbis had this idea that God's given his law. Boom. And in his law, he says you must not work on the Sabbath. And their entire relationship with God and the safety of their entire nation depends on them perfectly obeying God's law. Right? And God said, do not work on the Sabbath. What's the problem? If you want to perfectly keep God's law, what is work? Right? That's not very specific. Don't work. Okay, so I mustn't go to my job. But what else is considered work? And if your relationship with God depends on you perfectly keeping his law, you don't want to give any opportunity that you accidentally break it because you weren't strict enough with how you interpreted this idea of work. And so they created what they called the fence around the law. They said, here's God's commandment, do not work. We're not 100% sure what that means. So we are going to make rules that are like a big protective fence around the law. And these rules will be as strict as possible, way stricter than they need to be. But that means that if somebody breaks one of these rules, they're still miles away from actually breaking the commandment. And so that's good. And that shows how devoted we are to God and to perfectly keeping his law. And so then they spent hundreds of years debating amongst each other all of these rules that are in their fence. And in terms of the Sabbath, they came up with 39 different categories of activity that they defined as forbidden on the Sabbath. But how do you come up with healing is against the law on the Sabbath? Well, when they were creating their fence and they're thinking about healing, they're not really thinking about supernatural healing, because there are other ways to heal people. What's another way to heal people? Medicine. So when they're coming up with their rules, they're not thinking okay, God's not allowed to heal anybody on the Sabbath, because that'd be stupid. You can't tell God what you can or can't do on the Sabbath. They're thinking about people. They're thinking about doctors. They're thinking about basically, old school doctors. And how do doctors heal people? Medicine's one of the ways that they heal people. Now, how do you make medicine? At that time, medicine is usually made fresh. We go to the pharmacy and we buy the pills that got manufactured in China. They didn't do that, obviously. They went and collected some herbs, some roots, and they had to grind them up. And if you remember, grinding is one of the 39 categories of work, things you're not allowed to do on the Sabbath. Breaking things into smaller pieces. So making medicine breaks a rule in their fence. But okay, don't make medicine on the Sabbath. But again, this is a fence. We want to make the wall as high and as far away as possible. So just in case, just to be safe, we'll just say no medical treatment whatsoever on the Sabbath. And that's basically what they came up with. Doctors are not allowed to do any healing on the Sabbath. Except in one situation. What do you think the one exception might be? Sorry? No. Somebody's literally going to die. If they're going to die today, if you don't help them, you can help them. Because that would be a bit... But if it's not a life or death situation, if it's not an emergency, leave them, help them tomorrow. That's the thinking. So the problem in this situation is we have this man with the withered arm. What's the problem? It's not life or death. It's not an emergency. So just wait till tomorrow. You can heal him then. That's the thinking. But again, what they have in mind in all of this is not supernatural healing. Again, if God's going to heal somebody, I think they were humble enough to know that they're not going to accuse God of doing something wrong. But they're not really accusing or wanting to accuse Jesus of healing somebody supernaturally. They're basically accusing him of being a very skilled doctor or a very clever magician. And if that's the case, if the way that he's healing this person is by something that he's doing, then the law is very clear. You're not allowed to do that. Or at least their fence around the law is very clear. So anyway, you have this guy standing there with an arm, clearly suffering, clearly needs healing. Whether it's a setup or it's just a coincidence that they're using as an opportunity, the question is Jesus going to heal him? Is he going to do it? Well, if he does, he's going to be breaking the law. So they're all sitting there watching him. Are we going to get our shot? Are we going to get our chance? My guess is that he didn't take their bait. He just ignored it. Because then you have them prodding a little bit, which is what, if we're in Matthew 12, they ask Jesus something. And I think they're trying to poke him into doing something. So what do they ask him? Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And it's kind of nothing to do with this man here. I'm just asking, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Back to Luke 6. Verse 8, how do they respond? Or what happens? So Luke chapter 6 again. Keep your fingers in both of them, and we're going to be going to Mark soon. So Luke 6 verse 8. Luke 6 verse 8. Yes.
But he knew their thoughts and said to the man...
So he knew their thoughts. They say, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Is that an honest question that they're asking him? Are they genuinely asking this question because they want to know if it's okay to heal somebody on the Sabbath? Nah, they're trying to trap him. And he knows what they're thinking when they're asking this question. Okay, now Mark chapter 3. See what he does. I'm telling you, you want the full picture. You can't just read one of the Gospels. They all go together. It's really cool. Mark chapter 3. Verses 3 and 4.
And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Step forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they kept silent.
Okay, so again, you have the situation. Jesus is teaching in the synagogue. There's a crowd of people. In amongst that crowd, there's a guy with a clearly disabled, withered arm. Everybody's watching Jesus. He's not doing anything. So then the Pharisees are like, Jesus, is it lawful to heal somebody on the Sabbath? And it says he knew what they were thinking, and he said, okay, fine, I'll take your bait. You with the withered arm, come and stand in the middle here. And apparently the way a synagogue was often set up is it's not like this. It's not like the teacher at the front and then everybody sitting over there. It was like the teacher was standing in the middle of the group and everybody's sitting around them. There'd be benches on all the walls that people would sit on, maybe the older people, and everybody else is sitting on the floor. And you're standing in the middle talking to everyone. And so he gets this guy to come and stand up here with them. I think basically, so they're like, okay, now everybody can see who this poor man is that you're using that you're basically playing, whose life you're playing games with. And then he says to the Pharisees, he asks them a question, and what does he ask them? Owen? Oh my goodness. But so he says to them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? If you are only reading Mark and Luke, you have you don't actually know where that question comes from. This question of Jesus, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Because that's the first thing that comes out. And if you're only reading Matthew, he doesn't include what Jesus says there. But what's really cool when you put the Gospels together is you see that Jesus is actually responding to what the Pharisees said. The Pharisees said to Jesus, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And how does Jesus respond? How does Jesus usually respond to a question? By asking them a question. He actually ends up asking them two questions. But the first question he says, they've said to him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And he says to them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? You see what he's doing? He's like flipping their question back on them, but changing it slightly and showing like what the heart is behind their question. And he's basically like, if you can answer my question, you'll have the answer to your question. Of course it's lawful to heal somebody on the Sabbath, because it's obviously lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So he says, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or evil? To save a life or destroy it? Last week, hey Emery. Last week when the Pharisees were accusing Jesus and his disciples of doing something wrong when they ate some food on the Sabbath, Jesus said to them, if you had known what this means, I want mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. And he said the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. And so what he's basically saying to the Pharisees is like, you guys have it all upside down. You don't get the heart behind the laws that God has given you. God actually loves us, not his rules. The rules that he's given us are actually because he loves us. What he's doing is like he knows, and you'll discover this more and more in your life, he knows that if you just follow your own heart and your own desires and the things that your flesh wants you to do, it's going to bring pain and destruction in your life. And if he had just left us with no direction, that's what our lives would be. But he created us. He designed us. He knows what's good for us. And so what he's doing in the laws that he's given us, in the word that he's given us, is he's telling us how to live in a way that's going to bring life, not death, in your life. and in the lives of the people around you. But the point is, God's laws, his commandments, his instructions to us are supposed to be a blessing, not a curse. And he's like, you guys have taken this law of not working. Do you know how great that is? The Sabbath law? I think like one of the biggest problems we have today in our lives is that we don't keep that commandment anymore. There isn't a day in my week really that I properly rest. That's why he gave that commandment, is because he knew that if he didn't force us to rest, we never would. We would work 7 days a week, and we would suffer for it, you know? And he's like, this was supposed to be a gift to you, but you've turned it into a 39 categories of things, and now you can't even help somebody who's suffering because it's the Sabbath, you know? You're completely missing the point. And so then he says to them, back to Matthew 12. Who have we got? Noah. Matthew 12, verses 11 and 12.
Where is it? Okay. He said to them, if any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath.
Whoa.
Oh.
I might have stopped halfway through that verse. That's all right. So he points out their hypocrisy. He's like, every single one of you, if one of your sheep fell in a hole, you would pick it out. You would help it out. Even if it's a Sabbath. But this man who's in a metaphorical hole, you're happy to leave there till tomorrow. Now, we're not 100% sure if this was taught in Jesus' society, but have you guys heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? There are a whole bunch of ancient Jewish scrolls that were found in a place called Qumran, and they had their own kind of Jewish society, but in some of those scrolls, one of them, it talks about this, and it actually says you cannot do that. It says, no man shall deliver an animal on the Sabbath day, and if it falls into a pit or a ditch, he shall not raise it on the Sabbath. So it's possible that their fence around the law actually said you're not allowed to help out an animal if it falls in a hole, one of your animals. If that's true, then the point that Jesus is making is even stronger, because the sheep weren't pets. They're cute, but they weren't kept for pets. Sheep were like money, basically. They were a source of income. And so if a source of income falls in a hole, what are you worried about? It might die or get seriously injured and you lose money. And so apparently, from the way Jesus asked this question, every single one of you, if your sheep falls in that hole, you're going to get it out. And he's basically saying, like, you're happy to bend the rules for that sheep because it's valuable to you, but you're not willing to bend the rules for this man who's created in the image of God. You know? He's like, your value's all messed up. And so he says, like, surely a man is way more valuable than a sheep. And that's an argument that you'll see Jesus make. And yeah, he's basically saying, like, you guys are massive hypocrites. You're more interested in money than you have compassion on an actual person that I love. And that comparison, surely a man is more valuable than a sheep, is a comparison you'll see Jesus make a few times through the Gospels. Can you think of anywhere else that he says something like that? Do you guys know the passage about worrying? Do not worry about anything. It's cool. It's Matthew 6. Jesus says, And like notice, like he's asking you to be logical, to think about it. Don't worry about your life, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, about your body, what you're going to wear. Isn't there more to life than food and more to the body than clothing? Look at the birds in the sky. They don't sow, they don't reap, they don't farm, they don't gather into barns, but your heavenly Father looks after them. He feeds them. Aren't you more valuable than them? Like if he's going to look after them, surely he's going to look after you. And then in Matthew 10, he says, aren't 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. Even all the hairs on your head are numbered, so don't be afraid. You're worth many sparrows. It's kind of funny. Like you're worth at least 10. You know? I think he's being a bit funny, like a little bit sarcastic, but you're more valuable than many sparrows. If God's got them in his hand and he's looking after them, he's going to look after you. You don't have to worry. But all of this is like an encouragement. Like Jesus is actually encouraging us to think, to be logical and to rely on what makes sense, what we know, not necessarily how we feel. And I mentioned this a while back, but I didn't have the pictures to go with it. But I decided I'd put it back and do it properly this time. I saw this once, and I really liked it. Emotions are a good thing. You've been given emotions for a reason. They work very well as a check engine light. Something's wrong. There's a reason why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Something's wrong. But they're a really terrible GPS. Your emotions don't tell you what's wrong, and they don't tell you how to act, how to respond to it. They tell you there's something you need to look into and figure out what's going on. But then you have to start thinking. What has God said in his word? What has he done in my life? What has he done in the lives of the people around me? And then actually bring your emotions in line with what is true. And act based on what you know to be true, not based on what you're feeling. Does that make sense? So anyway, Jesus is trying to do that with the Pharisees. Guys, come on, think about it. This doesn't make sense. You're going to leave this guy to suffer because it's the Sabbath, because it's breaking one of your rules. Surely it makes sense to look after him, to help him, even if it's the Sabbath. Surely that's what God would want. But it says, Mark chapter 3, who's next? Mark 3 verse 5. Sorry, we are jumping all over the place, but that's because the story is spread across the 3 Gospels. Mark chapter 3 verse 5. Got it? Go for it.
And when he looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts.
Okay, stop there. So, he's said this to them. What's wrong with you guys? Surely you can understand this, and then it says he looked around at them in anger, grieved by the hardness of their hearts. Obviously, he could tell from the look in their eyes that they were unwilling to accept what was obviously true. They hated him so much that that they weren't going to admit that they were wrong. And it said he was grieved in his heart because of the hardness of their hearts, and he looked at them in anger. So this is, remember, a few weeks back. Jesus gets angry. Angry is not a sin. Depends why you're angry, and it depends how you act, what you do with that anger. But feeling angry is not always a sin. It depends why you're angry. Jesus was angry, but he had good reason to be angry. Jesus in the Gospels, as far as I know, I haven't done a comprehensive search, but I'm fairly confident in saying this. Jesus never was angry at anybody who was ashamed of their sin. Anybody who was humble about who they were and where they were. The people that he was angry with, and he certainly got angry with people, they were always the self-righteous hypocrites and people who would take advantage or exploit the vulnerable. Those are the people he got angry with. And he was angry with the Pharisees a lot. So anyway, okay, so now he acts. He looks around them, he's angry, and he says, okay, now I'm going to act. And the way that Jesus responds, like the way he does this, you're going to see, is so clever. It's awesome. He basically traps the Pharisees in a box. There's no way out. It's really cool. Okay, so again, for a moment, just imagine you're in this room full of people. There's this guy with a withered arm. There's Jesus that everybody knows is able to heal. It's proven ability to heal people. But it's a Sabbath. You're not supposed to heal on the Sabbath. So everybody is quiet. Everybody's eyes are on Jesus. What's he going to do? Is he going to go up to this man and take his hand and open it up? Healed. What does he do? Do any of you guys want to read? Harper? No? Lana? We'll pass on to Lana. Can we read back in Matthew chapter 12, verse 13? What does Jesus do?
And then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and it was restored.
So what did he do? How? He told his man to stretch out your hand. Do you realize how clever that was? How brilliant that was? What did he do? Sorry? What did he do? He spoke. They want to accuse him of healing this guy. Supernaturally? Do they want to say, oh, Jesus supernaturally healed this guy? No, they don't want to say that. They want to say he's working. He's a clever doctor. And he went and helped, he worked and fixed this guy. So if he'd gone up and touched him, they could have made that accusation. They could have said, look, he's working. But he didn't touch him. All he did was speak. So what are you accusing me of? Are you suggesting that I can heal people with my voice? Do you think they want to accuse him of that? What would that mean? Who can heal with their voice? Do you see how he's laid this trap for them? That they have no way of, what do I do? They want to accuse him of doing the healing. But if they're going to do that, they have to answer the question, who did the healing? Was it God? Because you can't really accuse God of doing something wrong on the Sabbath. But if it wasn't God, if it was Jesus, and he just did it with his words, with his voice, well, who is that? That's God. They're stuck. So they've got no way of dealing with the situation. Now, there is one way out. There is one way out for the Pharisees. And you're going to see that next week. Because they're going to take that way out next week, and it's not good. But in this moment, they don't know what to do. And so what do? Can somebody turn to, or can you go to Luke chapter 6? Uh, 11. Sorry? Luke chapter 6, verse 11. Who's got the microphone? We'll see how the Pharisees responded. What happened to it? Where's the microphone? Has Isaac got it? Nice. Sorry, yep, everybody reading along. Luke chapter 6, verse 11.
At this, the enemies of Jesus were wild with rage and began to discuss what to do with him.
So, the Pharisees, it says, were wild with rage. Mine says filled with mindless rage. They're furious. Why were they so furious? When you feel helpless, often the response is anger. It's basically a tantrum. When you're wanting a particular outcome and you don't get it, and there's nothing you can do about it, often, whether a 2-year-old or a 41-year-old, the response is anger. And that was them. They had a plan. They thought they had finally trapped him. And then they found themselves caught in his trap. And so they were filled with rage. Now, what should happen at this point? Again, we could go back to that thing. Anger. They're filled with mindless rage. That's an emotion. Then they should stop and think, why am I so angry? And if they'd thought about that properly, what should they how should they have responded to what has just happened? How should they have responded? 100%. Recognized we're wrong. Everything we think about this person is wrong. He can heal a guy by speaking. And he's filled with compassion. He actually wants to help somebody who's suffering, even if it is on the Sabbath. But that's not how they respond. What do? Matthew chapter 12 again, verse 14. Sorry? Over this way. Matthew 12, verse 14. What do? It says, in Luke it said they started debating amongst each other, like, what do we do? But Matthew tells us more specifically what conclusion they come to. Okay, listening?
But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus.
So at this point, they're like, we got to do something, and there's only one thing we're going to be able to do. Just kill him. Why do you think they thought that was the only thing they could do?
Because they were scared.
Of what?
They just saw him heal someone by speaking.
Yeah, they basically realized, we're done. Every time we try to trap him, the only way out is to kill him. Now, you could ask the question, we're thinking about the law and the fence around the law, what's worse, healing somebody on the Sabbath or plotting to kill somebody on the Sabbath? Presumably, but anyway, people are... Anyway, this pattern of the Pharisees trying to trap Jesus and then him basically then getting caught in the same trap, the trap that they laid, that's a pattern that you'll see play out all the way up until the last thing, before Jesus dies, that week he goes in the temple a bunch of times and the Pharisees question him. And they keep trying to trick him. That's where they're like, what's the greatest commandment? They want him to basically say one commandment is more important than the other, and obviously all of God's commandments are equally important. But Jesus says, well, there's two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love your neighbor like yourself. If you do those two, you'll keep all the others. Should we pay taxes to Caesar? Because if he says yes, then he is like siding with Rome, their oppressors. And if he says no, then he's rebelling against Rome, right? And we can get him both ways. And he says, bring me a coin. And they bring him a coin. And they say, whose face is on here? Caesar's face. He says, okay, we'll give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. But give to God what belongs to God. What belongs to God? Where's God's image? The coin has Caesar's image. Give that to God. Where is God's image? We're created in the image of God. Give yourself to God. Forget about the money. Who cares where that goes to, you know? And they keep questioning him, tricking him, trying to trap him, and every time he turns it back on them and they end up humiliated. And eventually it says they were too scared to ask him any more questions because they just looked stupid. That's a principle that you find in the Bible. Oh, do I not have them? Oops. Proverbs 26 says, the one who digs a pit will fall into it. The one who rolls a stone, it will roll back on him. So that's a warning. If you're laying traps for people, digging holes for people to fall into, beware. The Bible says there's a good chance you're going to end up falling in the hole you were digging for somebody else. And in Psalm 35, it says, I did not harm them. Like, you could pretty much, this could be Jesus speaking, and the whole Old Testament, Jesus says, is about me. So all through there, you'll find these passages that are really, they were about whatever the thing that was going on there, but they also somehow seem to be about Jesus. And it says here, I did not harm them, but they hid a net to catch me and dug a pit to trap me. Let destruction take them by surprise. Let the net they hid catch them. Let them fall into destruction. And that's basically what's happening here. They're laying a trap for Jesus and they're falling into it. Because now this whole synagogue has discovered that Jesus can heal somebody just by speaking, which is amazing. Okay. Then to finish, what happens next? Verse 15, Matthew 12. 15.
Jesus was aware of this, withdrew from there, and many followed him, and he healed them all.
Okay. So when Jesus heard that the Pharisees and some others were plotting to kill him, wherever it was that he was, it says he left. We're actually told he went with his disciples to the sea. What sea, do you think? Sorry? I kind of thought so, but after having a look into it, I think actually no. I don't know where the fields were that he was walking through. He lived near Capernaum, which was on the Sea of Galilee. But I think the sea he went to was the beach, the Mediterranean Ocean. I think he went out there with his disciples. And it says that huge crowds followed him and he healed them all. Mark, can we please go to Mark chapter 3, verses 7 to 10. Mark chapter 3, verses 7 to 10. Yeah.
Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him.
Nice. So, and then what was verse 10?
Oh. For he had healed many, so those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him.
You can kind of imagine. If words got out that there's a guy who can heal you just by speaking, The crowds are coming. And so we're told in Mark, he says, they came from where? What are the places? Judea. So this is Judea down here, this province. And? Jerusalem, that's the capital. And? Idumea. That's this area that's called Perea. It's this area on the other side of, it's Edom. It's where Esau, his descendants, is this area on the other side of the Jordan River. And yeah, that's over here. And they came all the way from Tyre and Sidon up in Lebanon to see Jesus down here. And it says, because he was just healing everybody who came to him. Then, and then verse 11.
Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God."
So, demon possession seemed to be pretty common at that time. And in places of the world, it still seems to be fairly common. I think it's more common here than we probably realize. I think that in a society that's very spiritually aware, so say like India, where they believe there's thousands of gods, for unclean spirits to be doing things that are obviously spiritual it's going to be helpful to them. But in the Western world, where most people, what is the main religion in New Zealand, would you say? Atheism. Most of the Western world doesn't believe that there is a God or any supernatural world. So do you think it's helpful for Satan to be doing all sorts of spiritual things all over the place? No, it's not. It's better for him to kind of work in the background in ways that aren't so obvious. But back then, there were apparently a lot of spirits, and when people with unclean spirits, with demons, appeared before Jesus, the spirits couldn't, they had to fall down and worship him and say, "You're the Son of God." Which is another thing that's something that we're going to see next week. They're like, even the demons obey him. What's going on? Who is this? Why do you think they think that the demons obey him? Or why do the Pharisees say the demons obey him? Yeah, he's using the power of Satan. That's why the demons obey him. Is that why the demons obeyed him? No. Yeah. So the demons fall down. They're all like, "You're the Son of God." And how does he respond? Back to Matthew, last two verses. Oh no. Anyway, last few verses. Verse 16. How did Jesus respond? Yes. It's quite interesting. Again, if you're just reading Matthew, okay, read from Matthew 15 and 16.
But Jesus knew what they were planning, so he left the area and many people followed him. He healed all the sick among them, but he warned them not to reveal who he was.
Okay, so when you just read Matthew, it's a bit confusing. It says, all these crowds came to him, he healed them all, and he told them, "Don't tell anybody who I am." That seems a bit strange. Why? But if you add Mark in there, who do you think he's telling not to say who he is? The demons who keep saying this is the Son of God. And it's them that he's saying, "Quiet. It's not the right time." And then verses 17 to 21. That's where we're going to finish. Of 12, yeah.
This fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah concerning him. "Look at my servant whom I have chosen. He is beloved, who pleases me. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not fight or shout or raise his voice in public. He will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. Finally, he will cause justice to be victorious, and his name will be hope of all the world.
So Matthew finishes, and I've pointed this out before, but Matthew, remember you have the four different Gospels, and they all kind of present Jesus, a different aspect of Jesus, or they focus on a different aspect of Jesus. Do you remember what those are? Who does Luke present Jesus as? Son of Man. His story starts all the way back with, he tells us the most about Jesus' birth. He tells us everything about Mary, angel visiting Mary, about John the Baptist's birth. He gives a lot of history about Jesus' physical birth. And when he gives Jesus' genealogy, the genealogy starts with Adam. And he traces Jesus' genealogy all the way back to the first man, Adam. Who does John present Jesus as? Or what aspect of Jesus' nature does John focus on? God. He says, in the beginning was the Word. That's his genealogy for Jesus. He's the Logos. He's the Word that spoke the universe into existence. What did Matthew focus on? He's the Jewish Messiah. He's the promised Messiah of Israel. And he starts his genealogy with Abraham, the first sort of Israel, through to Jesus. And what you'll find Matthew do again and again and again in his gospel is when things happen, when Jesus does stuff, he's like, the Bible, the Old Testament, the Jewish Old Testament scriptures said that would happen. And so he's always quoting, and a lot from Isaiah. And so he quotes this amazing passage from Isaiah 42. This is my servant whom I've chosen, the one I love and in whom I take great delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. He's not going to make a fuss. Nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. He's not going to be running around shouting, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Messiah. And he's not even going to allow the demons to say it. He will not break a bruised reed or extinguish a smoldering wick until he brings justice to victory. And in his name, the Gentiles will hope. And I think that's probably where this is coming from, because now people are coming even from Tyre and Sidon, which is not even part of Israel, and they're coming to Jesus, as well as the people all on this side of the Jordan. That Jesus, although he was the Jewish Messiah, the promised Jewish Messiah, even in the Old Testament it said that it was the Gentiles, that the Gentiles also were going to receive him and be blessed by him. And there's this little verse in there, verse 20, which I never understood. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering flame or a smoldering wick he will not be put out. I thought that was talking about him. You know, he's going to be beaten and broken, but he won't die, something like that. But apparently that's not right. Apparently what it's saying is he won't break a bruised reed, and he won't put out the flame of a struggling fire. That we're the bruised reed. We're the smoldering wick. And he won't put us out. He will help us, nurture us, protect us, not allow us to be broken. It's kind of nice. So, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. He cares for the vulnerable. He cares for the broken. He cares for the hurting.
He also cares for kids and children.
100% cares for children, and kids. And he cared for this man who was suffering. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, that is the end of that. And next week, we're going on to the next story, which in Matthew comes immediately after this one for a reason, because I think these three stories go together, and it's building. The tension and everything is building, and next week it breaks, and it's very bad for the Pharisees. Okay, let's pray. Lord Jesus, again, I thank you so much for your word. I thank you so much for your love, for your compassion, for your grace. And I pray and ask that in all of our lives you would help us to see that truth in it, and to cling to the things that we know are true. Yeah, Lord, I just thank you so much for your love, and I pray that that everyone here would feel that this week in some small way, that they would know your love and know your grace and know your compassion and know your presence in their lives. In your name I pray, Jesus. Amen.